Hello everybody, Jonathan Fox here. Welcome to a new episode of the Real Talk Real Estate Show. In today's episode, we're discussing all things you need to know about your property's boundary. Check this one out. I'm going to start this episode by giving you one simple truth, which is unknown to 99.9% of all home buyers out there. The property that you think you are buying may not actually belong to you. In any major city, specifically we're going to focus in on Washington, D.C., but any major city where properties have been around for 50, 100, 150, even 200 years in some cases, the location and boundary surveys that were taken are often wildly inaccurate. And I get it, you're thinking, what in the hell am I talking about? Well, simply put, the boundary surveys that were taken did not have tools that we have at our disposal today, and often there's a high degree of human error. So for as crazy as that all sounds, it is absolutely true. And this episode is really going to be geared on a personal story that I want to bring to the forefront. I was under contract on my own purchase. Again, 13 years of experience. I've sat through hundreds of closings. I've gone through a ton of real estate contracts and I have three different licenses in 3 jurisdictions. You might say that I know what the hell I'm doing. But on my own purchase, I was sitting at the closing table a few weeks ago with my fiance next to me, and we're going through all the paperwork, happy, no idea what's going on, and halfway through the closing, the title attorney whips out something called a location drawing. It's required with all purchases in Washington, D.C. that at least you're getting a loan on. They go through this location drawing, and they simply tell me that the property that I thought I was buying, which was an N-unit row house in Eckington, did not actually have any yard attached to it. In other words, the yard that I thought I was purchasing along with the house didn't belong to the house. It was DC public property. So needless to say, I was like, wait a second, you're telling me all I really own is the brick structure, the row house, but the parking, the irrigation system, the fence, the patio, the steps going from my side door to the patio didn't actually belong to me. Yet I'm sitting here with a cashier's check in hand, my down payment, ratified contract, the seller sitting across the table, everyone's in a good mood, and I'm sitting here thinking to myself, I'm only getting half the house that I really thought I was getting. Sounds like a horror story, right? Well, to tell you the truth, I sat there sweating bullets like that cannot be possible. How on earth can this property be so off? In fact, it was just conveyed in 2017. It was purchased by a developer, redeveloped, and I'm sitting here buying it. So in my mind, I thought this has to be a big mistake. So I'm pulling out my phone at the closing. I'm going through all the disclosures. I'm going through the closing documents, just seeing if there's anything that I maybe missed in the contract, that I misunderstood in the contract. Maybe the property didn't have parking, but folks, I'm telling you, it was advertised with the parking, with all of that I just mentioned. And I'm here only in the 11th hour, and we were at the end of the process to find out that's not all true. For as awkward as this is, I looked at my fiance and I said, we've got a real problem here. Let's get out of here. We took our cashier's check and we walked out the door, and now we had to go fight with the seller for our earnest money deposit, which is that down payment, good faith deposit we put down. And I'm here to tell you that it ended up going our direction. We have our earnest money back, but this really prompted me to want to give you the best information possible, because this is not an uncommon thing, evidently uncommon to me because I had not gone through this before. But here's what I'm telling you. When you're buying a property in Washington, D.C. or any other city, you really have two things. You have the structure and you have the land it's on. A lot of those properties were built without actually owning the property that was adjacent to the actual structure. Yet for years, decades in some cases, maybe there was a parking arrangement that's just been used, or maybe a front porch and a fence. All these different things that were acceptable 50 and 100 years ago, no one's really gone back and checked, is that parking arrangement on the physical property? Is the balcony on the property? And now, as a buyer, you have to be aware of that going in, that some of the amenities that you're looking for may not actually exist. So I'm going to break down the 2 different ways that you know what actually is your property. There are 2 different pieces of information. One is called a location survey, and it's required with all purchases, as I mentioned. The second one is a boundary survey. They may sound a lot alike, but you're probably only familiar with the location drawing that came with your closing documents when you bought your home. That is what's required. It's a $200, maybe $300 thing that someone goes out, looks at the land records, kind of references it to the current structure, and looks at the 2 things, draws a boundary and says, yeah, that's all correct as far as I can tell. Maybe indicates where the fence may be or the edge of the property line is, but it's not necessarily the law. It's just what is understood by the location drawer at that time. A boundary survey, by contrast, can be $1,500, $2,000, upwards of $2,000. And they actually go out with a land surveyor and they look at the public records, and they also go in and they drive stakes into the corner of the property, and they make sure that everything that's there belongs to that physical property. That's the only way you can really tell. But the location drawings are pretty good. But here's the sad part. A lot of people just blow right through that piece during their closing procedure, and it's really important information. This is where it's problematic. If your fee simple listing, in other words, not a condo, but fee simple listing conveys with parking, conveys with outdoor space or fences, you really need to look at that location survey critically. Why? That may not belong to you. And what does that mean? That means that the value of the property has changed based on that information. So what can you do? Obviously, you don't want to wait till you're sitting at the closing table to find out. Number one, ask the seller, do they have access to their old location drawing that they had done whenever they bought the house? Try to get that information while writing your contract. Number two, include language in your sales contract, which is really where your realtor is supposed to get involved, that protects you in the event those things aren't actually in there, which is a whole nother video. But just know that your realtor should include language like parking conveys, outdoor space, all of those things can be written into a sales contract, so you're not on the hook should it not be the case. But here's another thing that you can do, and this is number three, and I think probably the most effective one. DCRA, DC government, has a website where you can actually plug in your different information for the property and look up the public records that they have. They've at this point scanned all the old documents into their website. It's kind of a mess, but the fact is through DCRA, you can get this information, and I'll post a link below so you know where to access. Look at that website when you're circling the wagons on some type of property. Make sure that what DC has in the land records largely matches what's being advertised and what you're seeing. Because here's the bottom line reality of it, folks. The seller that you're buying from may not even know that they're falsely advertising what's there. And you, as an informed consumer, can get that information without having to go through the same process I went through, which was literally leaving a closing, which is, let me just assure you, one of the more awkward things I've ever done. Let me wrap this up right here. If you still move forward with the property and it doesn't actually own the parking, it's on public land, you may say to yourself, I'll just keep using it. It's been like that for 100 years. But here's the problem. When you go to resell that property, now you know, and now you have a disclosure problem on your hands. You could never market that property again as having those features that are exterior to the unit, right? So even if it works out while you live there, don't be fooled into thinking that you can then go forward and market it as such. You now know it's a latent defect that you now know about. As a seller, there's a ton of liability there. So be aware, this is why it matters. You want to know what you're getting into. You want to know what you're buying. And the way you can really help yourself is by getting ahead of it, do your research, and find out this information long before you get to the closing table, because take it from me, it's a little bit awkward. So get informed. If you have any questions, fire them away. Otherwise, we'll do this again soon. Thanks.